It's 10 o'clock, so let's make a start. Welcome to this, the 18th meeting of the Public Audit Committee in this session. First, ask everyone to make sure their phones are switched off. We have apologies this morning from Tavish Scott. The first item on our agenda is a decision on taking item 6 in private to allow us to consider our future work programme. Has the committee agreed that we take item 6 in private? Agreed. Thank you very much. Item 2 on our agenda is section 23 report into cardiology services. We have tabled a formal response from the Scottish Government in response to the correspondence we sent them after in response to our report on cardiology services. So we have to decide how we take this forward, and I'll just open that up to members. Anybody wants to? Yes, Mr. Beattie.
Just on page 5 about health practitioner and patient relationships, I'm not sure they actually answered the question adequately, because we were talking about absolutely having less GPs in these areas than in wealthier areas. They've told us some of the initiatives they've got. They haven't actually addressed that particular issue and whether it is an issue.
Mr. Beattie. Anyone else? Ms. Scanlon.
Yeah, I thought that was a good point. I actually, when I read it all, I wrote down the words slightly flippant and dismissive. Maybe that was an exaggeration, but I actually felt that there was a lot of this is what we're doing. And I think at one point they said a healthy, balanced diet is essential for long-term health. Well, I think in paragraph 39, I think we all knew that, and I felt that they sort of evaded the questions and just sort of told us what they were doing anyway. Having said that, I didn't feel there was a direct answer to the questions. It was more a case of what is it that we are doing at the moment. Having said that, in paragraph 4, there are final reports and interim reports on the evaluation of the performance of Keep Well, and the first one is coming in spring 2013. So I would certainly look forward to that, and I think apart from that, to be honest, I was slightly disappointed and would have preferred, instead of a whole range of what they are doing and what they might do and what they might consider doing, I would have preferred more direct answers.
Ms. White.
Thank you, Convener. I think it's actually quite good for them to space out exactly what projects are ongoing. But one that really concerned me was about the deep end practices. That's page 5, paragraph 10. I was really quite shocked to see that it's 100 general practices serving the most deprived areas, and of that 186 are in Glasgow. That was a real shocking figure. That's why I appreciate the answers that we've been given, because it brings it more focus and more back to home. Could we get any more in-depth, analysis of that deep end practices?
I think it's maybe worth reminding ourselves that, without jumping ahead to item 6, which we've agreed to take in private, that Audit Scotland have indicated to us that their next report is a report on health inequalities, and we're expecting that to be published in the next week. So I do wonder, along with Ms White, whether actually there'll be an opportunity there to return to some of these issues, including the one about GPs and deep end and the concentration of areas of deprivation in and around Glasgow, whether there'll be the opportunity to return to that almost immediately at our next meeting, in fact. Anyone else? Mr. Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener. I think it's important to note some of the positive messages in the response to the covering note from Derek Feely. There reminds us about the reduction in chronic heart disease amongst the most deprived in communities, and that I don't recall seeing that statistic during our journey through this study. So that's an encouraging message there, I think. But where I would agree with colleagues on the issue about GP numbers serving the communities, I think that you've mentioned just there convener, that we may wish to return to that, because I do think there is an issue there about whether the GPs are in the correct places in Scotland. I'm encouraged by the response from Mr Feely, but I'd like to see further progress on it. Could I draw your attention to recommendation 48, convener, on page 6? That was where, in my recollection, and I think you were in the same grouping as myself that particular day, there was a stated, a request really for more rounded support for our GPs. Do you remember that, convener? What I didn't take from that was that we expected our GPs to be the experts on everything, but we wanted them to have a more, perhaps a better or a wider partnership arrangement, I think, with other agencies. And I think that perhaps the response from the government there is a wee bit off the mark there with that particular point. I wasn't expecting GPs to take on greater responsibilities, just wanted them to have access to more support services and so on. So, turning to page 7, my attention was drawn to this Alice scheme that did seem to offer that kind of hope for me, and that's where I'm drawing a positive from this. You'll see from paragraph 19 there that GPs will be able to access these kinds of information and support services through a scheme called Alice, which I wasn't aware of, but I'm quite encouraged by that, and that will be integrated within the GP systems that are in place. Now that'll be pretty tricky, actually, from what I've seen with the GP support services and IT systems that are available in local practices. But that is an encouraging message, I think, there to look at. So, just to summarise that, convener, I would still have some concerns that we want to make further progress with seeing GPs serving the most deprived communities in an improved way. But I am encouraged by some of the work going on and the response from Mr Feely to give us some encouragement that progress has been made.
I certainly thought that the response to recommendation 50 got rather more to the heart of the issue that we discussed in our day in Glasgow with the GPs from Deep End, rather than recommendation 48. I think that's right. And I was also struck by, as you were, Mr Coffey, by the Alice initiative, which did seem to go to some of what the GPs were talking about. And I mean, I note that is an initiative which has now been rolled out, not directly by the Scottish Government, but by the Health and Social Care Alliance. And I wondered if, when we come to look at the Health Inequalities report, again, at the risk of jumping ahead, that might be an initiative that it would be worth investigating, and maybe even asking the Alliance to provide some evidence and detail to the committee, because, like you, I did think that went to the heart of what the GPs were saying to us. Ms Scanlon.
No, on that point, paragraph 16, I agree with Willie. I think it was actually the one that drilled down to answer the questions. My concern was that it wasn't rolled out across Scotland at the moment, but I can see that actions have been taken for that to happen. But I just wanted to give an example. I apologise for not giving it earlier. But paragraph 11, just the first sentence, seemed to sort of highlight what I was saying earlier. From the Scottish Government's point of view, the Deep End initiative has been encouraging and almost certainly good value for the resources we've put into it. And I think, we've got concerns that there wasn't enough teamwork and support for the GPs, but almost certainly good value for the resources we've put into it. Well, we don't know that. And it was just I wanted to highlight that point as the kind of uncertainty, because, let's be honest, there was a little bit of criticism of the money going into Keep Well and Deep End initiative. So, just to put that on the record.
Okay. I mean, there are two things, I think, in terms of going forward. One is that we do have the process of the Scottish Government progress reports. So one thing we could agree to do would be to add some of these ongoing concerns to that. For example, the Keep Well project, as Ms Scanlon has pointed out, there is an interim evaluation of that due early next year, and then a further final evaluation the following year. That's something we could certainly add to the committee's list of topics that we want to watch in brief report back on from the Scottish Government. We're due one next year. That's one thing we could do. And the second thing, I think, is that we could pick up some of these points when we come to look at the health inequalities report. I mean, I take from colleagues' comments that they do feel some of the questions we asked haven't been completely answered in the response from the Scottish Government. But I think what I'm suggesting is that these are points we might be able to pick up in our next piece of work. Would that be agreeable?
Sounds good, yeah.
And do we agree also to add keeping well to the progress reports that we receive?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 3 on our agenda is the Section 23 report, Commonwealth-Games 2014. This is the second of the regular progress reports on planning for delivery. The paper has been circulated to committee members, so I'll just open it up for comment and any suggestions of whether we want to simply note it or if there's any points folk want to pursue. Mr Dornan.
I just visited the Chris Hoy Velodrome and the headquarters, I've got to say. It certainly looks as if it's all going ahead nicely. So, and in terms of the report and in terms of what I've seen myself, I would think that we just note the report. There doesn't seem to be any.
Mr Dornan.
I don't want to say it publicly. I certainly wouldn't like to see any photos of that. No, but it was very impressive. There was the many uses they have for the velodrome. Incredible. Lot of community use during the day. Well, there was a international badminton championships going on, so it's going to be well used.
Mr Coffey.
Thanks again, Convener. It might be worth drawing the committee's attention to paragraph 9 on the revised proposals for providing security in light of the Olympic Games, the London experience there. I'm pleased to see that review taking place, and just to also note that I hope that when security considerations are taken into account, when we look at the public entering Hampden Park, if there's a new security presence there, it can take considerably longer to admit the public to the stadium, and I had some experience of that recently. At the Scottish League Cup semi-final, where they put in place some
may have been mentioned on the record before. Mr. Coffey.
But the impact of that, though, was that it takes far longer to get the public into the stadium than is perhaps anticipated, and I just hope that the games organisers are cognisant of that and make sure that the public should be told to arrive a bit earlier, a good bit earlier. You can't these days expect to turn up at the stadium with 5 minutes to go and expect to be in time for the beginning of whatever the event is. So with that in mind, I'm quite pleased to see some of the preparations that are underway.
Anyone else? The one point I noticed, which I think had changed, was in paragraph 3, or related to paragraph 3, which lists the new commercial partners, and in there, of course, is Atos, who've got the contract, I think, for doing the timing and analysis and so on, as they did, I think, at the Olympic Games. And I did note that earlier this week there was a protest at the Commonwealth Games headquarters because of another part of that company's involvement in the DWP assessments, and I wondered if there was any merit in us writing back and asking what consideration had been given to the potential additional security concerns around the likelihood of continued demonstrations. Those who were involved this week certainly did express an intention to disrupt the Games because of Atos's involvement, and I wondered if there was any merit in writing to ask what risk assessment had been made around that. Mr Dornan.
My only concern on this would be that we highlight the issue more than it has been already. I mean, we all have our opinions of the work Atos is doing, but they are one of the partners. They have been one of the sponsors. They did, as you say, do the Olympic Games. I'm not sure how much benefit we'd get from putting it back into the public limelight. And to be fair, some of the people who were complaining were at the headquarters last week, have been involved in other things, and I'm sure will be in other things in the future.
I think that's true. I'm in the hands of the committee. It's not something I've got a strong view on. I just did. Ms. Scanlon.
Well, I mean, Atos are a global IT company, and they're under contract from the DWP. You know, they're carrying out the contract as anyone else would. I'm actually with James on this. If Atos weren't doing this work, some other company would be doing it. So I actually acknowledge and agree with what James Dornan said. I think if the security's right, it has to take account of whatever demonstrations there are on the day. And I'm sure I've got confidence that they're doing that.
Happy to leave it there. So we note the progress report.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Item 4 is the Section 23 report, learning the lessons of public body mergers. And here we have a response again from the Scottish Government, from the Accountable Officer Paul Gray, responding to some questions that we asked. So simply open this up to the committee for comment.
They were actually Tavish Scott's questions, and Tavish isn't here today to say whether he's satisfied or not. But it seemed to me, to be a fairly comprehensive answer, and I just hope that it satisfies Mr. Scott.
Are we content to note Mr.
Yes.
Gray's response?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Item 5. Section 23 report, Scotland's colleges, current finances, future challenges. We had asked for some further information from the Scottish Government, in particular around the case for regionalisation, the regionalisation strategy and the responses there with members. We had also previously discussed the possibility of taking evidence on the progress of college mergers. I think the suggestion was that it would be valuable to hear from colleges which have actually started or maybe even completed the merging process, and that their experience would relate back to our previous item around public body mergers. So that's our previous discussion on this topic. Anyone want to comment? Yes, Ms. White.
Can I just make a quick comment? It's something that I have raised, not just in this committee, but in conversation as well, and I'm actually quite pleased that it's in print now. It's in Annex A, paragraph 2, about Audit Scotland's report. It's never really been mentioned very much at all, but in Audit Scotland's report, it makes very clear the significant growth in colleges' accumulated surpluses over the period 2006-7, and we're talking about income and expenditure reserves have went up from 98.9 million to 206.4 million. You never really hear that mentioned. I'm glad it's here, because obviously it is also saying, against the background of merging, the colleges are expected to contribute. And I've often wondered why it hasn't been raised when some of these colleges really do have huge reserves. And obviously Audit Scotland's report says they are expected to contribute. So I just wanted to point that out and get it on the record, because when we speak to constituents, obviously, as everyone has constituents coming to see about the college situation, I raise this time and time again, but you don't hear it raised very often, and yet some of them have got huge reserves, as is pointed out by Audit Scotland's report.
Yeah, anyone else? Yes, Ms. Scanlon.
Yeah. Well, in the Audit Scotland report, it did say some had huge reserves and some were seriously struggling. So I wouldn't like to give the impression that every college had huge reserves, but there were a few, and one in particular that had the largest percentage of the reserves. Convener, I just wanted to, well, first of all, my understanding is that the Education Committee are about to carry out an inquiry into regionalisation, and I wouldn't wish. I don't know the extent of their inquiry, whether they're looking at the educational benefits or if they're looking at the financial benefits on the basis of economies of scale and shared services. But I would just, I'm sorry I don't know enough about what they're doing, but I would just be apprehensive about us taking this a lot further and therefore duplicating the work that the Education Committee are intending to do. I wouldn't want to do that. So I'm seeking your advice on that one. And the second, well, I just want to come back to the 24% cut. I think, to be honest, this 24% cut, as mentioned in the Auditor General's report, has been all round the houses between Education Secretary, First Minister, etc. And for my peace of mind, I would like, just on that issue, to write to Audit Scotland and to seek clarity. Does the 24% cut identified by the Auditor General, does that still stand? Or indeed, is the cut greater or less? So that was just on the 24% because of all the debate. And on regionalisation, I think before taking it further, I'd like to know the extent of the Education Committee's inquiry.
Mr Dornan? On the 24% thing, I think we'd have to make it clear that if we are talking about does that still stand, we mean does that still stand with the other monies that have been put into it? Right.
What's been confusing, I would just like clarity on that, yes. I
would agree with your point that if the Education Committee are doing something on this, then I don't see why we should be doubling up at this stage on the rest of it.
I mean, the position with the Education Committee, as I understand it, is that they do intend to take an evidence session with the Cabinet Secretary on regionalisation, but the substantial work that they will be doing is that they're the lead committee on the Post-16 Education Reform Bill, which is the legislation or the statutory framework for that change. So they will be doing that. I think in our previous suggestions, we had thought that there might be some value in us taking evidence, I think, around the process of the regionalisation and the degree to which the cost-benefit analysis had been done, rather perhaps than the educational value of regionalisation. So I do think our interest in this is slightly different. I mean, it's a nuance, but slightly different to the Education Committee, and so there might still be some value in that session as, in a way, a follow-up to the public body mergers work that we're doing, and bearing in mind that we will return to that work because we've also asked or suggested that in our work programme we'd take evidence from the police, for example, once that single police force is in place. So I think, I mean, I'm in the hands of the committee, but I do think there might be some value in talking to some of the colleges which have merged with that emphasis rather than is this the best thing for FE and delivery of FE. On the budget issue, the 24% cut, I'm very happy to write to Audit Scotland again. I would just note that after the Auditor General's briefing, which she gave us on this report, we did ask her to provide us with more detail, and she did send a letter to us which she may feel has answered that question. But I certainly have no problem in writing to ask her again if Ms Scanlon and Mr Dornan think that's worthwhile. And I take Mr Dornan's point that the question would be about the totality of the FE budget in-year funding as well as planned funding. Mr Griffin.
Yep. I mean, I would agree with a lot of what you said. If we were to stray into the educational benefits or otherwise of college mergers, I think we'd be straying into the Education Committee's remit. But we have done, we have completed a body of work on learning the lessons of public body mergers previously, and I think it would be worthwhile to have the colleges in, because the Auditor General did point out she was still unclear about the cost and benefits of the regionalisation process. So I think in terms of us following the costs and following the public pound, it would be worthwhile for us to do a bit of research into the regionalisation process.
Yeah, no, I would support that. I was actually reading through the paper that we've got on page 10. It says the Edinburgh College merger assumes it can deliver savings of 9 million by 2014-15. And then on page 11 it says Edinburgh College merger is estimated to cost around 14.6 million. 8 million of that comes from a transformation fund. And then the conclusion mentions that the Cabinet Secretary has asked the Funding Council to make efficiency savings of 18 million in 2013-14 and 33 million. And I think they feel that these savings are achievable. But I would go along with that. I think as long as we're not straying into education, I think there is potential here not just to learn lessons from public sector mergers, but at this early stage of regionalisation, learn lessons that may be helpful for other colleges.
Mr. Beattie.
I just wonder if at this point it's premature for us to do anything further on this, because we're aware that the Auditor General is going to be producing a follow-up report next year, early next year, on the college mergers. Are we just sort of anticipating that in doing anything now? Should we wait for that report?
Mr. Dornan.
Given what my colleague has just said, I can see the merit in that. I was going to say that given we had agreed that we weren't going to be straying into the educational side of it, that there would be some merit, but given what Colin Beattie had pointed out, I wonder if we would be straying into territory that we would naturally be coming to very soon anyway.
Mr. Coffey?
Yes, sorry. Just to add to that, Convener, it's about choosing the most appropriate point for us to have a further look at the real figures as they outturn, and I think that's probably where the best focus for us will be, when that point will be, to get some of the colleges in to tell us what the actual outturn figures have been to this, because at the moment we're dealing with projections, and these figures at the moment, it's probably a wee bit early to do that piece of work.
Okay, can I make a suggestion then that we link this with the follow-up work on police, and that there's a point next year in 2013 where we return to look at public sector mergers generally. We've already agreed that we'll take evidence from the police and the police authority about how that's worked out. Can I suggest then that we look at some of the college mergers at that point as well? They'll be further down the road, and there may be a clearer picture of the costs and benefits at that point. Is that a compromise that would meet the timing question? Okay. Is that agreed?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, before we move to private session, I noticed that I should have asked the committee that we consider items 6 and 7 in private, so perhaps for the record we could agree that we consider items 6 and 7, that's the Scotland Act 2012 correspondence.
Agreed.
Is that agreed? We'll move to private session then.